Hi, good people. First, I want to thank all my subscribers and those taking time to like my videos. From the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for taking time to support me. Watch this video.
If you tell anyone, especially the police, I will kill your whole family. You are mine now, and you will do everything I say. You're my bitch now.
Emily Collins was one of P. Diddy's victims of child trafficking but managed to escape. And in this video, we have the opportunity to hear her story, where she tells all the atrocities she was forced to do to the American rapper. Imagine a beautiful young woman, full of light, who had a dream of being an international model, receives an invitation that seemed to be the perfect opportunity. But when she walks through the doors of a luxurious hotel, she enters a dark universe, commanded by one of the most powerful men in the industry, P. Diddy. What happened to Emily Collins that night changed her life forever. Now, after years of silence, she's ready to reveal the darkest secrets of a scheme that no one dared expose.
Since I was little, I always dreamed of being a model. I spent hours in front of the mirror, imagining what it would be like to be on the catwalk, wearing stunning clothes and listening to the applause of a crowd. At 16, I thought I was ready to take the first step towards that dream. So when a stylish woman named Claire approached me after a local fashion show in my town, saying I had the potential to be a star, it felt like the universe was finally listening to me. Claire was charismatic and seemed to know everything about the fashion world. She told me that she worked as a scout for big agencies and that there was a perfect opportunity for me in New York, an exclusive casting for promising young models. When I showed the invitation to my parents, they were hesitant, but Claire seemed so professional that she ended up winning their trust. He promised it would just be a chance to show my talent. When we arrived at the hotel in New York, I was blown away. It was the most luxurious place I had ever seen, with a facade that shone like gold in the nightlight. The main hall was full of girls my age, all as nervous as I was. It was impossible not to feel like something big was about to happen. But even in the midst of that glow, something seemed off. There were no photographers, cameras, or any sign of a professional environment. When I asked Claire, she responded with a quick smile, "Everything will be explained in due time, dear." When it was my turn, Claire led me to a room on one of the upper floors. It was small and full of mirrors, with a simple table in the center. The atmosphere, which had previously seemed magical, was now heavy. The glamour of downstairs was gone, replaced by something I couldn't understand. A man entered the room. He was tall, dressed in an impeccable suit, and had a cold smile that made me uncomfortable. "Are you ready to be part of the fashion world, Emily?" he asked as he analyzed my every move. I tried to look confident, but something about him made me want to run away. He put a contract on the table, full of fine print that I couldn't fully understand. "Sign here. This is the beginning of your future," he said, his deep voice echoing in the room. When I hesitated, he leaned closer, as if to intimidate. I started to feel trapped. I asked if I could think better of it, or show my parents the contract. But he laughed in a way that made me freeze. "That's not necessary. Claire already took care of everything for you." I pretended I needed to go to the bathroom and hurried out of the room. My heart was racing, and every step I took seemed to take me further from an exit. When I tried to go back to the main hall, I noticed that the hallways were full of security guards. They didn't say anything, but the looks on their faces made it clear that I shouldn't be wandering around. That's when Claire appeared again. She no longer had the friendly smile she used to have. Now she held me tightly by the arm, as if reminding me that there was nowhere to run. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You're exactly where you're supposed to be," she said with disturbing calm, leading me back into the room. It was at that moment that I realized the truth. This wasn't a casting, and the world of fashion that I dreamed of so much was just a facade. My nightmare was just beginning. When Claire took me back to that room, I felt a weight in my chest that I had never felt before. The door closed behind me, and the click of the latch seemed to echo endlessly in my head. The man was still there, waiting for me, but now there was something else in his gaze, something I couldn't identify, but that made me feel like prey being watched by a predator. "Let's try again," he said, pushing the contract toward me. His fingers tapped the table, as if he had all the time in the world to wait. I, on the other hand, felt time was going by too quickly, as if every second wasted was leading me to something much worse. I picked up the pen, but my hands were shaking. With every word I read on that paper, the more confused and terrified I became. The clauses were vague, but carried a frightening tone. Total commitment to the agency, reserve of all image and identity rights, acceptance of additional conditions, at the sole discretion of the managers. Nothing made sense, and everything felt wrong. I don't know if I can sign this right now," I mumbled, trying to sound firm. His reaction was immediate. He laughed, but not in a friendly way. It was a cold, cruel laugh, as if I had said something absurdly naive. "Emily," he said, leaning forward, "you're already here. This is the kind of opportunity girls like you don't get twice. To sign or not, well, you don't have a choice, you know?" My heart raced. I looked around, desperately looking for a way out, but the room had no windows, just those walls covered in mirrors that reflected my own panicked expression. I tried to calm down, but the air felt heavier, like the room was closing in around me. Before I could respond, the door opened again, and 2 men entered. They were large, dressed like security guards, but their gazes were as blank as they were frightening. They didn't say anything. They just stood there, as if they were waiting for something. The man behind the desk gestured to them, and one of them walked over to me. "Come on, you need to prepare yourself," he said, his voice as impersonal as his expression. "Prepare for what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out shaky. "You'll see," he replied, without explaining anything. Claire reappeared in the hallway as the men escorted me out of the room, but she was no longer the elegant, friendly woman who had approached me at the show. She seemed indifferent, almost impatient, like I was just another item on her to-do list. They led me down a narrow, dimly lit hallway, away from the main hall. The sound of distant voices and laughter disappeared with each step. The hallway seemed endless, as if we were moving away not just from the party, but from the real world. "Where are we going?" I asked, but no one answered. The walls seemed to get closer, the air grew colder, and the silence was broken only by the sound of our echoing footsteps. Finally, we reached an iron door. One of the men opened it with a key, revealing a space that seemed the opposite of the hotel's luxury. It was a dark room, with concrete walls and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Inside, there were other girls, all sitting silently, with scared expressions. "Come in!" one of them said, lightly pushing me inside. I wanted to run, scream, do anything, but something in their eyes told me it would be useless. When the door closed behind me, I knew my nightmare had truly begun. The other girls looked at me, but no one said anything. Some had red eyes from crying. Others seemed almost apathetic, as if they had already accepted that there was no way out. I sat in the corner, trying to process what was happening. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. The only thing I knew at that moment was that I was trapped, not just physically, but emotionally as well. They had created an invisible prison, where every choice seemed to lead to the same place. Deeper into a nightmare I didn't know if I could escape. I didn't know how long it had been since I was placed in that room with the other girls. It seemed like time didn't exist in there. The air was heavy, filled with fear and despair. Every now and then, one of the girls would be called out by someone outside. They never came back. The tension in the room was unbearable, and every sound of footsteps in the hallway made my heart race. When it was finally my turn, I heard the door open with a metallic creak. 2 men entered, both with expressions as cold as before. "Get up," one of them ordered. My mind screamed to resist, to fight, but my body was paralyzed by fear. They pulled me firmly by the arm, taking me out of the room without giving any explanation. I was led through the hotel hallways again, but this time, I realized we were going to another part of the building. The hallways became darker and quieter, away from the sound of music or laughter coming from the party. Everything seemed calculated, as if they wanted to make me feel completely isolated. "Please, I don't want this," I said, my voice shaking, but they didn't respond. It was like I was nothing more than an object, something they could move from one place to another without any empathy. As we turned a corner, I saw a double metal door in front of us. One of the men used a card to open it, revealing a staircase that appeared to descend underground. My body froze. I didn't want to go down those stairs, but one of the men pushed me hard, causing me to trip on the first step. "Don't make this any harder," he said, his voice low but full of menace. The stairs seemed endless, each step echoing off the cold, damp walls. Down there, the environment was completely different from what I had seen until then. There was no more luxury, just concrete walls, dim lighting, and an unpleasant, musty smell mixed with something metallic. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw another door. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. They opened it, and inside was a large room, lit by a single lamp that swayed gently from the ceiling. In the center of the room, there was a metal chair, and around it, several people were gathered. Some wore expensive suits, others casual clothes, but they all had something in common: cold and calculating looks. Among them, I recognized two faces I had only seen on television: influential figures in music and entertainment, men who seemed untouchable to the outside world. My mind refused to believe what was happening. I shouldn't be there. I was just a 16-year-old girl with the dream of being a model. How had this turned into a nightmare? A woman approached me. She had a flawless face and wore an elegant dress, but her presence was as menacing as that of the men around her. "Welcome," she said with a hollow smile. "You are special, Emily. You will learn that the real world is not like the fairy tales you imagined." I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I wanted to run, but I was surrounded. One of the men pushed me onto the metal chair, where my hands were quickly tied. My attempts to resist were futile. "You belong to us now," said one of the men, a cruel smile on his face. At that moment, I knew it wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. I had been kidnapped, taken to a place where no one would find me, where my voice would be silenced, and where I would be just another pawn in a macabre game. The first few days in captivity were a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I didn't know where I was, nor why I had been taken. The only thing I quickly understood was that the initial luxury of the hotel had disappeared, giving way to cold, impersonal, and oppressive environments. But the worst of all was realizing who was behind everything: P. Diddy. I had seen him before, walking through the ballroom surrounded by people who admired and feared him. I never imagined that someone so powerful, an icon that so many people respected, could be linked to something so horrible. Now, he was not just a distant name, but a presence that dominated every corner of that place. They kept us in isolated rooms, with concrete walls and simple metal beds, as if we wanted to be treated like humans. We heard P. Diddy's name constantly. He was the leader of that scheme, the man who gave the orders and controlled everything. Every decision seemed to pass through him, and his power was inescapable. "You are here because Mr. Combs believes in your potential," the guard said, repeating the name as if it were a sacred title. But the truth was that he saw no potential in us, just means to feed his ego and maintain control over a perverse scheme of trafficking and exploitation. Every now and then, he would appear. When he entered the room, the air became even heavier and all the girls shrank. He had a cold smile, which seemed to carry a silent threat. "You are lucky to be here," he said, with a tone that mixed sarcasm and cruelty. The events they organized were just covers for something much darker. I was taken to luxurious parties where I had to pretend I was there by choice, smiling for cameras while being closely watched. These parties, always controlled by P. Diddy and his associates, were a theater carefully staged to hide the true purpose. He seemed to be everywhere, moving the pieces of this macabre game with frightening confidence. The years passed in a blur of pain and silence. I was just 16 years old when I was kidnapped, and my body and mind began to bear scars that would never disappear. P. Diddy made us believe there was no way out. His influence was so great that even if we managed to escape, who would believe us? He was untouchable, above suspicion, and he knew it. When I tried to resist, even in the slightest way, the punishment was immediate. I once refused to participate in one of these events. Claire, who was just another pawn in P. Diddy's game, came up to me with a fake smile. "You know what happens to those who disobey, don't you?" she said. Shortly afterwards, I was taken to a dark room where I was locked for days. P. Diddy never had to raise his voice or hands. His control network was so effective that all it took was a gesture for his henchmen to do the job. But even in the midst of this horror, I began to plan. Every movement of the guards, every locked or unlocked door, every detail that could be used to my advantage. All of this was recorded in my mind. I knew that if I wanted to survive, I would have to wait for the right moment to escape. The men who worked for P. Diddy acted like they were invincible, but I knew that no matter how powerful his network was, they weren't perfect. I needed to believe that, because that was the only hope that kept me alive. Inside me, even buried beneath fear, there was still a spark of resistance. One day, I would get out of that hell. And when that happened, I would tell the world the truth about P. Diddy and what he really was. I'd form when I noticed that one of the guards always left the warehouse door unlocked while bringing in supplies. He seemed unconcerned, confident that no one would have the courage or opportunity to use this loophole. I knew this was my chance. I waited for weeks, maybe months, until the moment was right. Meanwhile, I continued pretending to be the obedient girl they wanted. I smiled at parties, followed orders, and forced myself to endure, even when P. Diddy appeared with his calculating gaze, reminding me that he owned everything there, including my life. On the night of my escape attempt, fear almost paralyzed me. The sound of muffled music was coming from one of the parties upstairs, and the guards seemed more relaxed than usual. I knew P. Diddy was there that night, overseeing yet another of his dark events. The idea of being caught by him terrified me, but I knew I couldn't hesitate. I waited for the exact moment when the guard left the warehouse door unlocked, and I entered quickly, holding my breath. Inside, there was a small, high window, my only exit. I used a stack of boxes to reach the glass, and with effort, I managed to open it. The cold night air rushed in, renewing my resolve. As I sneaked out, I heard voices in the hallway. My heart almost stopped when I recognized P. Diddy's voice, deep and authoritative. He was talking to Claire, ordering them to keep all the girls under extra surveillance. "I don't accept mistakes," he said. "If one of them escapes, it will be the end for you." With shaking hands, I pulled myself out the window and ran into the darkness. The terrain was uneven and full of obstacles, but fear drove me. Behind me, I heard the alarm sound, followed by the dogs barking. They knew I had run away. "She's not going far," I heard P. Diddy's voice echo in the distance. "Bring her back, whole or not." Those words gave me strength to continue. He wasn't just a monster, he was a predator, someone who fed on people's fear and pain. But I wouldn't let him capture me again. I ran like never before, running through fences, falling and getting up, until I finally reached the road. I didn't know where I was going, but the only thing that mattered was getting as far away from that place as possible. When I finally saw the lights of a small town on the horizon, I collapsed to the ground, crying with relief. I had done it. For the first time in years, I was free from P. Diddy's clutches. But he knew that the real challenge was yet to come, exposing to the world what he really was. My escape was just the beginning. That night, as I ran down the road, I felt like every shadow, every sound, was a sign that they were hunting me, and I knew they were. P. Diddy was not the kind of man who accepted flaws in his system. He had resources, influence, and people willing to do anything to keep his secrets buried. I managed to reach a small town, dirty and bloody, with my clothes torn and my face marked by terror. I found an open gas station, and the attendant, an elderly man, looked at me suspiciously, but also with concern. "Are you okay, girl?" he asked. I wanted to respond, tell everything, ask for help, but the words wouldn't come out. I borrowed a phone and called the police, But before I even finished the call, a strange feeling came over me. I knew they couldn't protect me. Who would believe a girl like me against someone like P. Diddy? He was not just powerful, he was untouchable. And worse, he was sure of it. The next day, the threats began. I was hiding in a cheap motel when my cell phone, which I didn't even know was still working, vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "You can't run away forever. We know where you are." My blood ran cold. He was already watching me, even outside that hell. I left the motel immediately, but I knew I was in a race against time. He had the resources to track me, to manipulate the authorities, to turn me into a fugitive. It wasn't just fear. It was as if he was always one step ahead of me, a predator hunting me relentlessly. In a desperate attempt, I went to a police station. I told part of my story, omitting names and details for fear of reprisal. The police officer who responded to me seemed genuinely concerned, but his expression soon changed as he made a few calls. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and hesitation. "You need to be very careful. There are powerful people involved in this," he said, without needing to say their names. I knew what that meant. Even if they wanted to help, no one would dare stand up to P. Diddy. He had friends everywhere, people who would do anything to protect him. I wasn't just a girl escaping from captivity. I was a living threat to an empire built on lies, fear, and pain. The following weeks were a game of survival. He changed places constantly, never staying in the same place for more than one night. Every time I thought I was safe, something would happen. A car stopped in the street, an anonymous message on my cell phone, or even a stranger who seemed to watch me for too long. The worst moment happened when I was in a public library, researching ways to expose my story without being tracked. A man I had never seen before approached and whispered in my ear, "He knows you're here. You should have stayed where you belonged." I ran away, leaving everything behind. He wanted me to know that there was no escape completely, that his shadow would always be over me. P. Diddy wasn't just a man, he was an entity, an entire system dedicated to silencing anyone who dared challenge him. But despite the constant fear, I didn't give up. Inside me, the spark of resistance was still alive. I started documenting everything I remembered: names, places, events. If something happened to me, at least the truth would be on record. I knew telling my story would be dangerous, but it was the only way to fight the monster he was. Every day out of captivity was a victory, but I also knew that the battle was far from over. P. Diddy wanted to silence me, but I was determined to make sure my voice was heard, even if it cost everything. Even away from captivity, P. Diddy continued to haunt me. It was as if his presence hovered over me, even when I was in crowded places. Every move I made seemed to be watched. Every attempt to tell my story was quickly silenced by forces that seemed larger than I could face. After months of running away, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. Hidden, afraid of every shadow. I needed to find a way to expose what had happened. I knew it would put my life at risk, but the alternative was to live forever under the control of a man who thought he could do anything and get away with it. My first attempt to tell the truth was on an anonymous blog. I wrote down everything I remembered: the names, the places, the parties, and P. Diddy's role in the entire network. But a few days later, the blog was taken down without warning. I received a message on my cell phone. "You are playing with fire. Stop before you burn yourself." The tone was clear. They knew what I was doing, and they would do everything to silence me. P. Diddy's power wasn't just money or connections. He had built a protective network that made him almost invincible. Journalists, lawyers, even law enforcement figures seemed to be on his side. Still, I kept trying. I found an independent journalist who seemed willing to hear my story. We met in secret in a remote cafe, and I told her everything. For the first time, I felt like someone truly believed in me. "This needs to be told," she said. But before we could move forward, she disappeared. It simply disappeared. Days later, I received an email from an anonymous sender. "Did you really think she could help? No one can." That message destroyed me inside. P. Diddy didn't even need to hide. He played on fear, on the power of his reputation, and knew he could destroy anyone who tried to challenge him. But he didn't know that, at that point, I was already recording everything. Every message, every attempt at silencing, every step of the way. Everything was documented. Even though he had managed to silence others, I was determined to make sure that if something happened to me, the world would know what he really was. I made one more attempt. This time I recorded a video with my face showing. I looked into the camera and told my story in detail, without hiding anything. P. Diddy, the man the world saw as an icon, was a monster behind the scenes. I knew posting that video would be like signing my sentence, but I also knew that if I didn't, I would be allowing him to continue hurting other people. When I published the video, I turned off all notifications. For days, I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know if people had watched, if they believed me, or if he was already coming after me again. Then something unexpected happened. The video went viral. People started commenting, sharing, and even other girls started coming forward with similar stories. For the first time, I felt that maybe he wasn't as invincible as he believed. But at the same time, threats have increased. Anonymous messages, cars parked near where I was, and even attempts to break into the place where I was hiding. P. Diddy was furious, and his power was still real. I knew the fight wasn't over yet. But at that moment, something inside me changed. For the first time, it wasn't just me against him. Other voices were joining mine, and the truth he had tried so hard to hide was finally coming out of the shadows. Today, at 32 years old, when I look back, I can hardly believe that I survived. The 16-year-old girl, full of dreams, was destroyed by a man who used his position of power to control and silence people like me. P. Diddy, the icon admired by so many, was a true monster, but now, finally, I can say I'm free. After publishing my video and seeing the impact it had, something inside me changed. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a voice again, and that voice could make a difference. It wasn't easy. He tried in every way to destroy my credibility. His lawyers accused me of slander, his team spread lies about me on the internet, and people I had never met started attacking me. But I was no longer alone. Other survivors began to speak out, and together our voices grew stronger. Influential people began to support our stories. Investigative journalists began to gather evidence, and slowly, the myth of P. Diddy's invincibility began to crumble. He was still trying to reach me, of course. I received countless death threats, and every time I left the house, I looked over my shoulder. But now, I had something he couldn't take from me: courage. He spent years trying to silence me, but the more he fought against the truth, the more the world saw who he really was. Over time, I managed to recover. I started going to therapy, something that, at first, seemed impossible. Dealing with trauma was a long and painful process, but with each session, I felt as if a piece of the weight I was carrying was being lifted. I don't feel completely cured. I don't know if I ever will. But today, I can live without the constant fear that consumed me for so long. My story also gave me purpose. I began working with organizations that help victims of trafficking and abuse, using my experience to support others who have gone through what I went through. I know not all survivors have the opportunity to tell their stories, but I promised myself I would do everything I could to be their voice. As for P. Diddy, he continues to try to clean up his image, but the allegations have grown so much that he is finally being investigated. I don't know if he will face justice, not in the way he deserves. Men like him have the resources and power to avoid real consequences, but the world knows who he is now. And that, for me, is already a victory. Today, I live with a sense of freedom that seemed impossible a few years ago. I'm not completely cured, but I'm at peace with my story.
I hope you watched the video from beginning to the end. It's important. Please remember to subscribe, share, and like. Thank you.